Okay, for part of the assignment this week, we're going to up the ante a little bit, and we're going to add a little bit of complexity to this whole thing. Those of you that are budget Nazis or budget nerds or whatever you want to call them are going to be giddy about this, and some of you may not be as happy with all the process. But we know, our lives are not just 7 different budget categories, and we can break them down into it and that sort of thing. And if we're going to actually determine where we might have problems, where we need to restrict our spending in certain categories, then we need to identify, we need to just drill down a little bit deeper and get a handle on things. And as you can see, actually I filled out, at least partially, this monthly cash flow budget. This is actually for the bank statement. I just took it right from there and added up the different categories and applied it to this particular budget. But I'm going to ask you to do this for yourself, because I know that some of you have got really complex lives. You've got families, and you have a household budget. And by the way, everybody has a budget, whether they write it down or not. But by writing it down, we get a lot more control over it. First step, I'd like you to print this out, the form that isn't filled out, that I'll supply to you. And then I want you to fill it out for yourself. And the best way to do this is for the month prior, and I'm going to state that we may be in February right now, but I want you to use the bank statement, your own bank statement, the one you run out of, for January, and total up these things so you can actually start with the amount that you spent last month. Okay? I know there's going to be some things in there like every month's not the same and all that kind of stuff, but at least it gives us a jumping off point to building a really good budget for yourself. Okay? So just to explain this budget, we're going to take all of our regular income that we can count on coming in for the month and put it right up here in the monthly take-home pay. All right? So, and next, we're going to break down those major categories. And you're going to have the chance to add some additional categories within these particular categories where you see fit for your own personal use. So, for instance, for charity, we may have our tithes that we've spent to the church. We may have some other charity and offerings. And, those could be anything, gifts that we might have. And that might be a category that would be a category that we would start saving for possibly earlier in the year. As Dave Ramsey said, Christmas does come every single year. And if we start planning for it, if we start budgeting for it, then maybe that's going to be part of our budget. And we would actually start a sinking fund for Christmas. So $100 a month. At the end of November, we've got $1,100 in there. How about that? And then we can spend that $1,100. Once it's gone, it's gone. And then we start over and we start saving back for the next year. But anyway, and this is the intentional thing that budgeting does for us, is that you'll notice that the next category is savings. Now, I want to spend a little bit of detail on these two categories itself. I have actually, over the years, asked people, where do they think that their budget actually suffers? And, almost invariably, it's not always the case, but almost invariably people say that they'd like to give a little more, and they'd like to save a little more. So why not? And this is not typical for most budgeting that we've been taught in the past, if you have been, is that we put these two things that everybody seems to think is pretty important at the top of the budget. So we turn the budget over. Instead, we've got them at the top, and we plan for those kinds of things. And they're very, very important, as we pointed out before, in our savings unit. If we get down here, our emergency fund, it's the number one thing. If we don't have that thing, then we won't be able to meet any emergencies that come along. And as you know, life, if you live life, and if you're breathing, if you're active, you're going to have some emergencies. If you don't have an emergency fund set up, then you need to start budgeting for it and start planning for it and start building it up. This is not expected that you would have it overnight. Now, we would like you to just do everything you can in order to get that emergency fund, the $500 or the $1,000 if you don't have it, because that's just going to relieve some stress right off the top. Okay? And then once we get into this budgeting, and you may not be there yet, I understand that, but we're going to talk about that possibly later. You're going to think about some college or some retirement funds for yourself. Some other savings, if you have kids, then most of us want to actually put together something and start planning for that. The earlier you get started with a college fund for your kids, maybe you have time to put them in a mutual fund and they can build. You can put them in a 529 and start investing and taking advantage of the compound interest that we talked about in the savings plan. And then we'd also have some other savings accounts possibly for other things. Some sinking funds that we talked about, the Christmas one possibly. Now, housing, we're going to have to deal with some of these things that that come along. We either have a mortgage or we typically have some rent. If we're staying with our folks, then maybe we don't have any rent this time. So you may have a zero, but you may have to plan for that once you move out, of course. A second mortgage, if you have two houses, okay. Hopefully you're not in that spot, but you never know. Or maybe you've got some land that you're paying for, a part of a ranch, and you're building that particular place up. Taxes are owed on those particular assets, and they can be planned for as we go along, and we want to enter that into there. Okay? And how do we plan for that? Usually the real estate taxes, if we're paying a mortgage, are actually taken out on a monthly basis. We don't have a mortgage, which I'm happy to say that I'm sitting in that boat right now, and but we have to pay them once a year. So I'm going to budget the amount that be 1/12 each month in order to make up for it, so I'm not sitting there going, oh, you have this whole oh crap moment where the bill comes in and you go, oh crap, I didn't actually plan for that. So I'm going to budget that amount each month. For every month, 11 months out of the year, I'm not actually going to make a payment to real estate taxes. But that's how we would handle that. We would budget so much and save it back so that we have those monies when they're needed. Maintenance and repair to your housing would be something that we budget, maybe on a monthly basis. And then when something happens, or we're actually going to upgrade a little bit, we have those monies available to them, and they're just going into our savings account from there. So that's how we're going to budget those things. Association dues, maybe you do or don't. It's not real typical in most of us that live in Wyoming, although we're seeing a little bit more of that kind of thing as we get into more people moving into more developed areas. Utilities, we're going to break that down. The reason that we break some of this down is because we might identify where we can save some money. Okay, if it's just the broad category of utilities, it's pretty difficult to get a real good grasp of it. Okay, so it may be that, well, you're taking this class, so you got to have your internet, but maybe you can do without the cable or the Netflix or the Hulu and that sort of thing. Maybe those things are, they're actually needs rather than wants, but maybe they're wants rather than needs. You know what I'm getting at here? So that we can actually identify those things and plan for them. and doesn't mean that. Anyway, I mean, the whole idea of living like no one else, so that we can live like no one else. Most people aren't on a budget. So do you want to be like everybody else? I don't think so. Food, we've got broken down into groceries and restaurants. Maybe you want to put an extra category there that says fast food, depending on that sort of thing. If we break it down here so that we can really, when we apply what we spent, we can actually see if there's a problem in that category. We can cut back on eating out, for instance. And maybe we can do a better job of grocery shopping. In this particular case, $356 in groceries for 2 people. I think we could probably, I'm just kind of making this up as I go, but maybe we could get, I'd like to see if I could do it on 300. Okay, and maybe I cut out restaurants for, a month or 2. Okay, so that's kind of the idea behind this thing, is that especially if you're having the budget committee meeting with your spouse, you're going to have to get together on this. You're going to have to wrestle with it a little bit. All right, don't get physical, and be understanding. And there's going to be some give and take about everything. There's going to be some compromise within this budgeting process. So those single people would be easy. If you're wrestling with yourself, well, you got some other problems too. But there's going to be a little bit of back and forth if you've got more than one person involved in this process. You might find out that you're spending too much on, or more than you think you should, on gasoline, for instance. Licensing taxes may not, there's not a whole lot we may be able to do that. Maybe we haven't been budgeting for repairs and tires ahead of time so that we have a sinking fund for that particular item. So and there might be some other things that go along with transportation. If you don't have a car and you're using Uber, well, maybe that you need to put one of those categories in there if you're out and about. We don't have much Uber here in Wyoming, although we just got it a year ago. All right? So, and then there's this one. We don't have much going on in this particular month in medical and health. We had one pharmacy bill for $9.23 that we paid and was spent. And but many of you may have a whole lot more as far as that goes on any one of these categories. And we can plan for that sort of thing. Or we can save up so that we will have the money available when we get down to it. Okay? So, anyway, that's kind of, this is a really kind of a real detailed approach to this, rather than just putting it in these really general categories, so that we can drill down, we can actually see where maybe the problem is. The debts, you're going to have to pay them back. Okay? So, for each one of these, we would plan and we'd list out those particular debts that we are going to have to pay back within the month, and what the payment would be for that particular item. We're going to come down here. I haven't added them up here, but use the income sources form right here. We're going to add the totals, and then we're going to come back here, and we're probably the first couple of times through here, we're probably going to have a number there. Hopefully it's not negative. Could be. We could have a deficit, or we could have a surplus. And what we want to do is force this thing to 0, just like you did last week with the real simplified type of budget. But I would recommend that you actually fill this thing out in pencil first, and then you start applying this. And in most cases, if you're going to do a budget like this, the first priority is going to be to take care of some of the things like the debts that haven't been taken care of. We're going to apply a little bit more to principal on certain loans. So that would be one thing that you could actually get ahead on. And we're going to show you in a whole other unit a really systematic way to pay off your debts if you have them. Some of you are early on in your college experience, don't have much debt. Congratulations. Hopefully we can keep you from going too far into debt or staying out of debt in this process of getting your education. But it's life. Some of you are actually going to make those kinds of decisions and go into debt. So we're going to give you some tools to get out. So that would be the first priority I would have in formulating my budget. If I had some debt, I would pay those things off first, and then I would come back here and I would start putting it, maybe I need to give more. And maybe I've even got additional surpluses that I can build up my complete emergency fund to that 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. Or if I already have that in the bank, maybe I can put a little more into my retirement account or the college funds for the kids. So that's what I want you to do. That's one of the parts of the assignment for this week. Hopefully that kind of explains it for you. And I wish you the luck. If you don't need any luck actually, but if you have any questions on any of this material, please give me a call or email me, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.